pulled directly from the field. I'm hoping that these questions these answers will illuminate the questions that individuals have and not just the specific cases at hand. The Eden Center works to improve the experience of the mikvah and promote the spiritual, emotional, and physical health of Jewish women and families, and provides intimacy education for different stages of marriage. We're hosting a 3-part series. Tonight is on dating and engagement. Later, we will be speaking about sexuality on the timeline. We'll be speaking about children and teens. So please look out for those advertisements in the coming weeks. I would like to start with a disclaimer. The therapists in tonight's webinar are all from and will all be sharing suggestions in that context. With regard to personal practice, speak to your halachic authority if you have any questions. We are not dealing with halachic issues tonight from a halachic standpoint. We are inviting you to send comments privately to Dr. Naomi Grummet, the director of the Eden Center, and she will be passing on the questions to me. At the end, we will display the panelists' phone numbers and emails, and if you would like to speak to any of the panelists further, they would be happy to do so. Okay, let me introduce my panelists. First, we have Dr. David Ribner. He is the director of the Sex Therapy Training Program, School of Social Worker in Bar-Ilan University. He is a certified sex therapist in Israel and the US. He is in private practice as a sex and marital therapist in Jerusalem for decades and has authored 2 books on the subject, and of which his most recent release this year, co-authored with Tali Rosenbaum, I Am for My Beloved. We have also Lizzie Rubin. She is an individual couples and sex therapist with special training in abuse, postpartum depression, pre-weds, and newlyweds. She directs the Eden Center's mikveh attendant courses programming in Israel and abroad. Jodi Wachspress, is the founder of the Oasis Center and specializes in marriage and family therapy and couples and sex therapy. She is currently pursuing her doctorate in clinical sexology. I'm so happy that all of you could join us, and I'm looking forward to what each person has to contribute. I will start with the first case. Okay, we have here first case to our panelists. Hadassah and Ilan got engaged in January and were planning on getting married in the beginning of June. All was set, including the band, the caterer, photographer, etc. When Corona hit, they decided to push off their wedding to September. They're both disappointed, but they agreed it was the only way to make sure their parents could fly in for their wedding. And we're hoping that still happens. They are shomer negia, and they have no idea how they will continue to do so until September. How can they stay committed to their values for so long? It's really hard. They're asked, also, how can they deepen their intimacy without physical touch? So they're turning specifically to the sex therapist as opposed to halachic authorities to help us delve into this issue. Lizzie, would you like to start with this one?
Sure, thanks. Am I unmuted? Yeah. A lot of people have asked us about the name of this seminar and said to us, so what do you mean intimacy during engagements? And the truth is that, you know, we know the ideal and we know the real. It is very difficult for couples who know each other, spending a lot of time together, to be shomer negia. So that's why we brought this up, because we've been getting a lot of cases like that. Now, Hadassah and Ilan, so they are your typical religious couple. So between us, we sort of discussed whether we thought that people should postpone their weddings. It's obviously everybody's choice, and there are many reasons, but, you know, aside from the fact that being together it is very, very difficult for 2 people when they like each other. But I personally think that there are other reasons. Sometimes, you know, the engagement loses its momentum and you can start getting depressed and you start losing all the excitement. And I just think that, you know, it's not plan A, but maybe it's plan B, to get married now and later have the big party. But getting back to them, I just wanted to say that they are a couple that both agree on this, that they both want to be shomer negia. I think that they need to have a discussion. How can they keep themselves like this? What are the boundaries? What are the limits? Where should they go? Where should they not go? And support each other with their difficulty, that they really, it's hard for them. It's hard for them to be shomer negia. They should talk about it. And I think by doing that, that's the way they can deepen their intimacy. That was the end of the question. How can they deepen their intimacy without physical touch? Well, emotional intimacy is the answer, and being supportive of each other and continuing the conversation is my answer.
Can you speak, Lizzie? You just said emotional intimacy. Can you just tell me a little bit what that means?
Well, I think it's when couples are engaged, that's probably how they feel. They feel so excited and they're so close and they want to talk about everything and they want to share their feelings. I mean, it takes a lifetime. I mean, people are always getting emotionally intimate, closer to each other. But I think engagement is a time where this is what they do. People talk and get to know each other and are excited to be together.
I want to add a little bit about emotional intimacy because, you know, there's a concept of 8 different types of intimacy. And I actually see one of my colleagues here, Susan. I see you here from my program in America, the doctoral program. And one of our professors, Dr. Marilyn Volker, speaks about 8 types of intimacy. And emotional intimacy is one type of intimacy. Sexual intimacy is one type of intimacy. The other types are spiritual intimacy, aesthetic intimacy, which means sharing beautiful things with one another. There's affectionate intimacy, which is non-touch, non-sexual intimacy, just sharing affection and feeling close. Because intimacy, a lot of times in Judaism, we use the term intimacy because we don't want to say sexuality or sexual intercourse. We don't want to say those words because we're being careful. But intimacy is something that's emotional. It's not necessarily something that's physical. That the physical is only one component. So a couple can increase their intimacy in general in so many ways. You can go on beautiful tiulim together. You can play games. You can learn. You can, you know, look through pictures of the flowers you want for your wedding and really enjoy the beauty in life together without it being something sexual.
Just also add to this that it's important, I think, for the couples at this stage to realize that they are investing now for the rest of their lives, and that how they see themselves now, it may not be necessarily the way they would like to see themselves in the future if, in fact, they decide that their values are not as binding as they might have liked. And there will be periods in their lives as they move along where, in fact, they would like to be intimate with each other physically, and it won't be possible. And this is a way of being able to say to each other, look, we have sufficient amount of self-respect and mutual respect here, that we do have the ability to see this not just for the immediate 2 months or 2 weeks, but for the next 20 years, 30 years, ad mea v'esrim shana. And I think that kind of perspective may give them a sense of who do we want to be and how are we investing in that now.
Yeah. I think this is also, I mean, this is not just a problem for Corona. I think that this is a bigger problem now that could happen in other different situations, such as, you know, a couple that can't get married because they're in university together, or, you know, just like he's in the army. So it's like a problem that really does come about. And I especially think, you know, with the halachic mind, where there are people that are committed to this, that it's a question that does come up quite often in terms of that, where there are times where they can't, you know, they just can't get married right now.
Yeah, I think also I do want to address a little bit about the corona, or in America we're calling it COVID-19 or pandemic, whatever word we're deciding to use. Again, the words that we choose are so important, because if you're talking about a pandemic, it means something a little bit different than if we're talking about a virus, right? So we're always very careful with the words that we use. And I also want to be attentive to the fact that, you know, this is, you know, something that couples have to negotiate in all different aspects of their lives. But they were sort of, they had their countdown. You know, so many couples now, and you guys here, you know, that are engaged, you know, your friends do the countdowns and 29 days left and 28 days left. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're not 28 days left anymore. Now we're 100 days left and we have to start again. It's a real adjustment that we have, that you have to make. And it's not just figuring out the florist again and the photographer again. It's readjusting your mindset to the fact that there's going to be more time now that you're negotiating this. Whether, you know, you're able to, if you're able to get married sooner and do the party later, that's great. And if that's not in your control, suggesting your mindset and reminding yourselves of your core values together, as my amazing colleagues just said.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to move on to case number 2. 1 second. Case number 2, Asaf and Noga. Asaf and Noga are dating pretty seriously. They hook up and do everything except sex. I'm using their language. The other night, in the midst of their hooking up, they just ended up having sex. They have no idea how it happened. They're totally overwhelmed and don't know what to do. This has huge ramifications. Can you please give them some advice? Dr. Ribner, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think in keeping with what Jodi mentioned, it's important for us to define our terms here. And as we go through the questions, we just want to make sure that we're all using the same vocabulary. We're assuming the term hooking up means being physical with each other up until actual sexual intercourse. And when any of the questions here talk about sex, that's what that means, sexual intercourse, okay? Now, we might do some differentiating as we move along here, but at least we all should share some common understanding of the words that we're using. That's the first thing. The second thing is that assuming that this couple did not actually do any planning for them having sexual intercourse on this particular night, there are some significant physiological ramifications here, meaning that it's certainly possible that she may become pregnant. And what we want to avoid at all costs is an unwanted pregnancy and the challenge of thinking about whether to terminate this pregnancy or not. And there are ways, in fact, to deal with it, and couples need to know about this. I mean, first of all, if they're in fact in a situation where they are very close to having intercourse, they're already taking off most of their clothing, they're already in a place that's entirely private, they're already feeling very comfortable physically with each other. Well, the step to having intercourse is not a step across the Grand Canyon. It's a step from one side of your hallway to the other. That being the case, they need to have some preparation for this. And birth control is one of them. And because we really don't know at this point if either of them had any previous sexual partners, it would be a critical decision on their part that if in fact they're going to maintain this kind of interaction or to take it any further, that they consider very carefully what they're going to do to prevent pregnancy and do so in a manner also that assures that this is a safe sexual experience for both of them. Again, we are not promoting this. We're saying we are talking about potentially devastating situations here, either through a sexually transmitted infection or through or an unwanted pregnancy. Those need to be prevented at all costs. Secondly, if in fact they do have intercourse, in fact he does ejaculate inside of her, there is something called a morning after pill, most commonly known as Plan B. That pill is remarkably safe. It's easy to get at any drugstore. You don't need a prescription for it. The sooner you take it after intercourse, the more effective it is. It does not have 100% effectiveness rating. The highest rating it gets is about 89%, but it's certainly better than having to worry about this. There are other factors as well. People who are severely overweight, there may be other issues with regard to whether or not they can take this medication. But certainly couples should know that this is available to them. It's not as if we're saying to them, okay, go ahead and have sex because the next morning you can go to your drugstore and get this medication. We're certainly not saying that. We're saying that if the situation arises, and rather than deal with, again, the devastation of an unwanted pregnancy, there are ways to deal with this that are safe, effective, medically approved. You don't need a prescription from your doctor. Certainly, if any woman wants to talk to her OB/GYN about this, she should feel comfortable doing so. She will not be the first and not the 100th person to raise this with her physician. And so it's really critical that couples know that they have these options. This kind of behavior also engenders all kinds of other feelings. I think later on, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about guilt and how to deal with that. And certainly at the end of this scenario here, that seems to be one of the overwhelming emotions that they're feeling here. And I think later on, we'll talk about that. But I think also couples need to know that this is entirely a private matter. They don't need to talk to their rabbi about this. Their ketubah is still going to say betula on it, no matter what. No one else has to know about this except this couple. If in fact they need help preventing this from occurring again, maybe they cannot do this themselves and they need guidance from someone. A guidance could be a college teacher, a guidance could be a physician, a guidance could be any other kind of sexual health professional, but they may need help in being able to draw the lines here in a place that's comfortable for them. And I think the overarching message is that from the time that you begin to fool around with each other and start, let's say, taking off each other's clothing, until your time you actually get into bed and actually have intercourse, there are 20 places along the way that people can say no. 20 places along the way that they can stop. And I think that message needs to be something that not only is valuable to them as they move through this very challenging aspect of their lives, but accompanies them as they move from this particular incident, which clearly at this point they seem to regret and do not necessarily want to return to it, but they may be in similar situations. You can say no at any place along the way, and that applies to either of them. They can both do that. And the notion of respecting each other's opinions and values ends up being, again, a critical issue with regard to these kinds of situations.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, you know, this feeling of, on the one hand, you know, it's so hard to anticipate, we get caught up in the passion and one thing just leads to the other, seems to be a very, you know, like a common scenario. And then we also have people on the other side, especially the, you know, those of us who are madrichot kalot will be talking to couples about, wait, but we're not even sure how we're supposed to do this. So there is some in between there, you know, where you know, having sexual intercourse doesn't always just happen. Like Dr. Ribner said, there's a process, and there are a lot of stages along the way. And having a discussion beforehand about what your values are as a couple, first of all, is great practice for the rest of your lives. Being committed to one another is being committed to helping each other do things that are hard, you know. And it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say, I'm, you know, all right, I'm the one that's actually stopping this now, even though I don't want to, or I don't want to disappoint you. It's okay to do that because you want to think about the next morning. Would you rather be going to the pharmacy and getting that Plan B pill, or would you rather be saying, wow, okay, we managed to negotiate that together and we're coming out of it stronger. The other thing is, you know, this idea of falling off the wagon. Sometimes couples feel like, oh, well, we already had intercourse once, so that's it, right? There's no such thing as falling off the wagon. If you fall off your track, you know, that doesn't mean it's a done deal. You can always come back and say, okay, well, that happened, and I'm still committed to what I'm committed to. So it's okay. It's okay. Nothing changed so drastically about who I am and who you are and who we are. We are still committed to the same things. We had we had a little slip up, we got a little carried away. It's okay. We can come back to what we believe in and support one another in that. And I think that that's really, really important.
And I'd like to add, I think you guys really covered pretty much everything, but I think that when it says here that they just ended up having sex, I think that in their mind, you know, while this is happening, I think a lot of couples have, you know, should I say no? Should I not say no? If I say no, maybe he'll be upset or maybe she'll be upset. I think having this, you know, knowing what the other person, having a conversation with them about what you believe in and respecting those limits will help them not get into the situation before. I know that many women and many men might think that we're in the middle of this and maybe it's even my fault, or maybe I don't know how it happened, but a lot is going on in the mind of the person, even though they're in the heat of the moment. I think we're very aware also at the same time of, I want to, I don't want to, can I say it, can I not say it, should I say it, should I not say it? And having that conversation beforehand will probably be very helpful for the next time.
Amazing, thank you. And I think that all of these conversations are conversations that are so important to be having as a couple embarks on their relationship together. Meaning, like, before people get sexually active together, before they get, you know, physical together, they should be talking about it. And this is just another way to encourage them to speak about what are their values, what do they think about, where do they want to go up to, what do they want to do. And I think it's super important to be having those conversations. I'm going to move on to case number 3. Mayan and Moshe, who are in their late 30s, have been dating for 6 months, and things are becoming more serious. Moshe has always been shomer negiah and wants to continue to do so. Mayan really does not. This is a major point of contention for them, and it's really holding back their relationship from moving forward. Mayan wants to know if they will be sexually compatible. How are they supposed to know if they've never touched in any way, she asks. In the back of her mind, she's also a bit nervous that Moshe is a homosexual. Any advice how to navigate this? Jodi, do you want to start with this one?
Sure, this is a great one. There's a lot going on for Moshe and Maayan. They are, first of all, they have life experience. They're in their 30s. They've most likely had some sort of relationship in the past. And if they weren't in a relationship in the past, that's also, gives us some information about them. We know that Moshe has been Shomer Nagia. He hasn't touched any other women in a romantic in his life. He and she, Maayan, right? We don't know what her experience is with physical touch in relationships and sexual intimacy. So I would really want to talk to them about that and respect both of their feelings, both of their perspectives, because they probably had some time to do some real thinking about this and trying to understand themselves. Now, they're in a relationship for 6 months, so there are a lot of things that they do have in common. There are a lot of things that they enjoy about each other. They say they're in a serious relationship. Now, the issue of being Shomer Nagia or not is a point of contention for them, which means they've tried to discuss it, right? It means either they've discussed it verbally or they've discussed it, with body language. So what we would really want to do is try to understand what exploring their sexuality together in a physical sense means to them. What stands behind her desire to make this such an important part of their decision making, whether or not they're going to continue with their relationship, and what it means to him also. We do know that she's concerned that maybe he's homosexual, right? So we would want to try to understand what she's picking up on there. But even before that, we want to talk a little bit about adaptability and compatibility, right? When you're in a relationship, you have to be adaptive. Being adaptive to someone, leaning into someone else's needs doesn't mean erasing your own needs. It does not mean that at all. It means putting your needs in one category and being able to sort of lean into the other person and learn them from their perspective and from their experiences. Hedy and Yumi Schleifer, am I getting that right? It's a hard last name to pronounce. Yes. Okay. They have a great model called Crossing the Bridge, where they encourage couples to invite one another to their world. They say, can you please come cross over the bridge into my world? Let me introduce you. Let me give you a tour of what's going on in my world. And you're bringing yourself, but you're sort of leaving your ideas and your perspectives on the side so that you can open your mind and be open to what's going on for me. And then when you go back across the bridge, back to your world, because that's your world, I'm going to give you a souvenir. Or what would you like to take from my world? So you're really sharing experiences, and that's adaptability. In terms of sexual compatibility, that is not something you find out overnight. Being, starting to touch each other and to fool around, or if we're saying hooking up, or being, having sexual intercourse together. Yeah, that will give you some information, but it's not going to give you yeah, this is going to work, or no, this is not going to work. In terms of the
Jodi, can I just ask you on that? Yeah. I get a lot of questions about whether, is there such a thing as a couple that's not sexually compatible?
Depends how important their sexuality is in the big scheme of things. So there are couples that need to work on their compatibility, and I would encourage those couples to seek counsel from a sex therapist, because we would be able to sort of unpack what's going on behind it and underneath it. And the question is if they're available to do the work. If they're available to do the work, I think that pretty much people can become more compatible if it's that important to them. If there's one person that feels like they need a certain type of sexuality, otherwise they will be feeling as if they're not a priority, straight up, or that they can't get aroused the way the other person is willing to be sexual with them, that would require some therapy. And does it mean therapy will always work? No, it doesn't mean therapy will always work. It really depends on the situation. And the question of how important that is in their relationship, what their choices are.
So it's okay that they're not being sexually intimate, because eventually when that happens, they can work out whatever issues they work out if they come up, is what you're saying.
That's a tough question, Judith. I would love to hear what everyone else has to say. It's a tough question because so many couples are so worried about that. Like, they read things in the newspapers and they, there's studies done on the amount of divorces after couples dating for this amount of time or that amount of time, or living together first, and what the statistics are. First of all, most of those statistics are done, in a lot of the ones that I read are done in the US or in England, and we don't know exactly what that's like when there's a Jewish mindset and Jewish values. But it's a big concern, and any relationship, anything important in your life includes some sort of a leap of faith. But I want to hear what everyone else has to say, because that's a really good question. I will never say that I definitely, a relationship is going to work and you'll be able to work out your sexual incompatibilities. I wouldn't say that.
One of the most amazing things about human sexuality is that it's endlessly variable. And so the likelihood of finding some common ground at some point, I think, is fairly good, assuming the couple has this basis of emotional intimacy that they're willing to build on. And they both come to this with a certain amount of goodwill and sense of humor. We have a pretty good shot at finding some place that they both might feel that they could be satisfied in. And the other thing is, I would just add to Jodi's very rich description is I think there's a notion here of acceptance as well. How much can you accept the other person? How much can you tolerate who they are as a human being without feeling that they need to change? And here there seems to be some desire here to cause a change. And when you try to change somebody else, it's almost always a disaster. So we need to find some place here that is going to allow them to maintain some level of this relationship without feeling the need to, I need to change you, I need to change your values, I need to change your behaviors. We would like to avoid that. We'd like to avoid that at all costs. And just to speak to the issue of homosexuality for a minute, the fact that a man may be 35 years old and has not yet gotten married or has not had any sexual experience does not at all relate to the fact that he may be heterosexual or homosexual. If she's very concerned about that, I think it's worth raising it with him, discussing it with him. She might want to ask him what his sexual fantasies are, what direction do they move in. If in fact his sexual fantasies are towards men, children, something else that she finds to be not in keeping with her expectations, and that's a good reason for her to think twice about continuing with this relationship. We're not going to change the direction of his sexuality, but she can clarify that. And I think she has the right to make that part of what their dialogue is at this point, since in fact it is 6 months into this relationship.
And I'd like to say that I think sexual compatibility starts before they're even sexual. Like the way I would ask them, how do they love to sit close to each other? Do they love to be together? What do they do together? Do they look into each other's eyes? Is she getting a feeling from him that he wants her, yearns for her? That would be like a clue for her to know what's going on. Besides asking, like, how can you be 35 years old and never had touched a woman? I think it's a reasonable question. There are men that are like that, but I think it's a reasonable question for a girl to say, like, how did you do that? Having an abuse background, I think about, why hasn't he? Maybe there is something, and I don't know if there's a sexual incompatibility, but maybe there is something that went on in his life that he had to work through. Maybe he's gone for help, or maybe he hasn't worked it through, and he's scared of being sexual. It's a possibility and something for her to explore with him. And
yeah. I think that also we want to talk to them about trust, because if they've had some part of this conversation and she's not feeling satisfied with the results of the conversation, does she trust him? Does she trust what he says to her? Is he saying to her, no, I am super attracted to you. This is one of my core values. Remaining Sharmanagya is one of my core values, and I want to stick with it. And I understand that means that once if they do get married, it's going to be a big transition for me, because I have to learn everything, and I'm 35 years old, or however old he is, and that's something that I want to do together with you. Does she does she trust him? And then the other thing is, you know, is she giving him the guilt trip? You know, we spoke a little bit, Dr. Ribner spoke a little bit about the guilt, that we're going to bring up the issues of guilt. And here we want to know, is she sort of like making him feel guilty? Is she saying, well, if you really loved me, or if you really were heterosexual, you would not be able to control yourself around me? And we want to make sure that she knows that it's not okay to force him to be sexual with her when he's saying that goes against his core values. You know, that wouldn't be the beginning of a great relationship.
Excellent. I think those are, yeah, go ahead, Lizzie.
Sure, I just want to add one more thing about homosexuals. The ones that I have met, okay, they love to be friends with girls, and they really can be very close, but they don't give a feeling of wanting the girl. So I would try to explain that to her and ask her if she feels that when he's with her. Again, does he yearn for her? Is he just a really good friend? You know, I think it's a generality, but homosexual men are interested in men, and does she get that feeling that he's interested in her? Is her basis for this whole thing? Is he going to be attracted to her? Well, they have to talk about it. He has to also show it to her in ways that are not physical.
Yeah, that's also important, that they're able to show their intimacy in ways that are not physical, that you could pick up on, you know, and see if there's like a vibe going on there. And I think it's really important to pick up on that and to develop that throughout the dating process. I think that that's also what we're picking up on, is that these people are at a cusp of developing their emotional relationship that we spoke about in the first case. And it's, you know, how do we go about doing that? Okay, case number 4. Odelia and Oran. They've been dating for a few months. The other night, Odelia was hanging out at Oran's place and all his roommates were away. They started hooking up. Odelia had expressed earlier to Oran what her limits were, but in the heat of the moment, Oran kept on pushing her to go further. She was really uncomfortable, but did not know how to stop him. She had gotten him started. Now that she's reflecting on the night, she feels really upset. Oran is such a nice guy, but she doesn't know what to say. She feels really uncomfortable that she went past her limits. Do you have any advice? Lizzie, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Okay, so when I hear this, I think about how hard it is for girls to say no. I said this before, but how we don't train our little girls to say no, and we teach them to be good girls. The same thing can go for boys, I'm not saying, but in this case, she had told him earlier what her limits were, and in the heat of the moment, she couldn't say no, and he got the message that it's okay to go on. So I'm just like encouraging people, whoever listening, and all mothers and grandmothers and sisters and whatever, and everybody in the family, to teach your children from a young age that it's okay. Nobody can touch your body where you don't want them to. And if somebody's doing something, not even sexual, but anything, you have the right to say no and to be respected. The other thing about Odelia and Oran is that she says, oh, she got him started. So she's taking responsibility where she really should have been respected in the first place. And I think she's feeling guilty that, well, it's my fault. Well, it's never somebody's fault if they were forced to do something they don't want to do. And I think that, again, he's a nice guy, but I would really, really check him out to see what's going on here. Why is he not respecting her boundaries and her limits? And why is he pushing her to something that she doesn't want to do? This is also a look into the future. If they're going to be together, is this something that is going to be their dynamic, where he is going to push her to do things that she doesn't want to do, not just in the bedroom, but anywhere? Okay. That's what I have to say.
I think also it's important for people to know how to say no. All too often, the implication of no is I'm rejecting you as a person, as opposed to saying, no, I don't want to do something that you're inviting me to do. So I think people need to have that kind of finesse in their language. She doesn't seem to want to reject him. She doesn't want to seem to leave the relationship. She would like to be able to say no and have that respected. I think people can learn how to say no. Now, they may need some help to do that. They may need to be able to do that in a certain tone and a certain use of language. But I think that would be a tool that, as Lizzie has mentioned, would be helpful for the two of them as they move along into the future. And essentially, no doesn't mean I'm rejecting you as a person. I just don't want to do this that you're asking me to do right now. And the second thing I think that's important here, and there's a very difficult line sometimes between a request and saying no, and then moving into an area of coercion, and then moving from there into an area of abuse. And again, people need to be able to have a sense of what does this mean to me that I'm engaged in this particular moment of this process at this point, right? Is it just that I'd rather not do this? Am I feeling coerced into doing this? If I end up saying yes, do I feel that I've been emotionally and sexually abused? I think those differentiations end up being critical sometimes in making a decision, and also with regard to living with that decision the next day. People don't necessarily arrive at this kind of understanding on their own. And I certainly would support that in this case, this couple would do well to have some contact with a sexual health professional to be able to wend their way through this, at this point, very difficult passage without necessarily needing to see that this relationship is at an end.
Yeah, I want to jump on the bandwagon with the way the communication between the couple, because I can totally get this couple. I totally see this sort of scenario unfolding. You know, a couple that loves each other, they've been dating for a few months, you know, they get excited, they're humans, they have sexual desires, and, you know, sexual arousal is happening, and you know, they're growing to, you know, if they've been dating for a few months and we're talking about them tonight, that means that they're serious about their relationship. And giving to someone sexually, giving and sharing a sexual experience with someone is one of the 5 love languages. If we bring up Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, physical touch is one of the love languages. She may be saying, oh my gosh, he's showing me how much he loves me and how important I am to him, and I want to show him how much I love him and how important he is to me. And that's conflicting with what I believe in. That's conflicting with my, you know, with my core values, and it's not lining up, and I'm all confused, and it can be a very overwhelming situation. So my heart goes out to Adelia, and my heart also goes out to Oran, because there's a really good chance, like we've been talking about the possibilities that he's pushing her too far, and he's not reading her correctly, and he's not recognizing her boundaries. But what if he's not understanding her boundaries? What if they need to sort of like slow things down and go and talk to a sexual health professional, or to a you know, a madrich or yoetzet or a rav if they're comfortable, just to have the conversation about how to have the conversation, because it's not such an easy conversation for a young couple to have. And just like there are 5 love languages, Gary Chapman also has a book that's much less well known. And I don't even know exactly what it's called. I think it's 5 Ways to Say I'm Sorry, or 5 Ways to Apologize. And I think he could probably write another book, 5 Ways to Say No. You know, you can say no very aggressively, you can say no very sensitively, and you can also say no with a backup. You know, this does not feel comfortable for me. I will not go any further, and I love you, or I really care about you, and again, I'm not saying no to you, I'm saying no to this behavior. I think that's an important place. And, you know, when we talk about responsibility, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. With great responsibility comes great power also. So when you are able to, if Adelia would be able to sort of say, okay, I'm going to be the responsible partner in this situation, and I'm going to follow up on it, that could be such a great opportunity for the two of them. And then they could also recognize that maybe they shouldn't be hanging out in Oran's apartment when none of the roommates are around, and they can avoid a situation that, you know, is tough for them in the future.
I think also something that I thought about when I was thinking about this case was the idea that one of the things that she said there, that he kept on pushing her to go further. And I think it's something that we grow up in our religious worlds hearing, is that once men get started, they can't stop. Can you just comment a little bit, one of you who would like to see that? What does that mean? You know, is it possible for a man to stop right in the heat of the moment?
I think there's a lot of mythology with regard to human sexuality, and one of them is that people aren't capable of stopping once they get to a certain point in whatever sexual process they're engaged in. This is relevant to to women as well as men. There is no reason to assume that anywhere along the line, people can't stop and can't say no, however frustrating that may be. But tolerating those kinds of boundaries and that clarity of expectation is, again, as I think my colleagues have mentioned, really an investment in their future together in terms of, well, what happens when other issues come up, and one of them does want to say, does want the ability to be able to say no and expect to be heard. So yes, there's a myth that once men have this button pressed, they can't turn back anymore. That's just mythology. And men will have confronted perhaps very powerful desires for the first years of their lives once they left puberty and before they got married, and were able to not take things any further. So they do have some precedent for this. And again, as this couple moves on in the future, they will need to have this as part of the tools and understanding of each other.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to case number 5. Rivka and Shmuel are engaged. She has grown up in an environment where she has always been taught that good frum girls and boys are not physical together. She's learning about sexuality from her Kala teacher, and all she can think about is good frum girls don't do these things. In fact, the thought of seeing her Chatan undressed is disgusting her a bit. Her Kala teacher has mentioned different positions for sex and other possibilities of what to do with her Chatan, and she's getting physically nauseous. She's not sure how much she should push herself to get over this. Everything she's learning now seems so anti to what she was taught growing up. How can these actions with a man be okay to do? Who would like to take this one first? Dr. Ribner, would you like to?
Sure. I think one of the things that's amazing for us who work with religious couples, particularly those couples who are Shomer Negia, is that the overwhelming majority of them seem to make this transition from no to yes and to a mitzvah very relatively easily. In other words, they've been hearing no not to do things, don't think, don't look, don't touch. They've been hearing it multiple times at home and at school, and all of a sudden they're standing under the chuppah, and what was once forbidden is now just not only permissible, but is a mitzvah. And I think, again, I have no particular rational explanation for why that works for most people, but it does seem to work for most people. And we really don't have any precedent for that in the world of halacha. We can't take Tuesday and turn it into Shabbos. We can't take a piece of pork and turn it into kosher meat. But here we take something that was osar and we make it into something that's mutter and a mitzvah. So the fact that she's having some difficulty with the transition, I think is only to be expected. And one would assume that if her Kala teacher is investing in knowing her as a person, there would be efforts on the Kala teacher's part to help her with this transition. And particularly, it's not all or nothing. In other words, the fact that you have left the wedding hall and you now are going into either your apartment or a hotel room, doesn't mean that all of a sudden you need to be passionate with each other for the entire night. I mean, if there needs to be a transitionary process here for her to become more accustomed to this, I think that certainly is valuable and a message that may in fact ease some of her discomfort here. But I think we also need to look at this young woman's history and what are all the messages she's been receiving all of her life, and what was the nature of intimacy that was part of her growing up in her family. I mean, how did her father look at her mother when he sang Eishes Chayil on Friday night, or did he bother looking at her at all? And if we need to help her deal with what the messages that she received, how they may have been damaging for her, and what are messages that are much more positive, I think certainly we can make that effort and move in that direction. I think also I'm going to leave my colleagues here to talk more about perhaps a more intimate kind of woman-to-woman contact, either with her Kala teacher or with the Rabbanit or somebody else, to really talk to her about women's sexuality. I'm not saying that men can't do that, but at this stage in her life, I think she probably would feel more comfortable hearing it almost as testimony from someone who is not only talking in theory, but saying, listen, this really is a positive aspect of our lives, and how you enter this and how you pace yourself does not mean that you will not get to a place where you and your chassan can have a very positive, physically intimate life.
I'm going to jump in there as a Kala teacher for many years. and say that, first of all, I think that this question upsets me. And when I see girls like this, I get very, very upset because I think it's too late to teach the girl sexuality just then, 2-3 months before the wedding. I think it takes a whole teenagehood or whatever years to process and to think about it. As a kid, we all thought that, well, that sounds disgusting, but we had time to allow ourselves to think that and to move towards, oh, so that might be interesting, so that might be something good. And this Kala is someone who is actually is pretty in shock, and I don't blame her because she's never seen anything. I actually have someone in my family at college that once said to me, she never saw anything between her parents, but one time in the kitchen, she saw them hugging, and she was so relieved because she knew that she wanted to know if her parents really loved each other. Saying that, I think that I tell my Kalas that there's nothing in the Torah that's disgusting, and I give them all these resources, that everything that Hashem did is good, but if she wants, I understand and validate why she thinks it's disgusting, because as kids, that it doesn't make sense. But as adults, we look at it differently, and an adult can share many feelings at the same time. Oh, this is weird, but maybe this is good. So I asked her to take the word disgusting and downsize it to something else. How about not pleasant? And you can deal better with non-pleasant than you can with disgusting. And I asked her to switch her disgust with maybe curiosity, and that I give her time to talk about it. And I think that when hopefully at the end, if this girl still is feeling very uncomfortable about it, maybe I would send her for therapy, because I don't know if every college teacher has all the tools to describe, in case there's something more serious here, such as serious anxiety or something like that. But I think that it does well to teach our children from a younger age, whatever is age appropriate for them, to talk to them about bodies and give them words and give them names so that this case doesn't happen.
Well, that's a good advertisement for our next webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to take the other perspective here a little bit. I generally like to see like the sunshine and roses in relationships and give people the benefit of the doubt. But in this situation, I feel like we do want to look at why she's what's leading her to use these terms, these really extreme terms like disgust and feeling this visceral feeling of nausea when she thinks about seeing her chatan, her new husband, undress. And that would raise a red flag for me. And I agree with Lizzie. I would also, as a Kala teacher, I think that would be one of those red lights that would go off, and I would be more aware that maybe more is going on here, and I would look at that. I would also encourage her to get some sort of psychosexual education to work through the anatomy and physiology of sexuality and talk about women's pleasure, and give her the validation and the permission to connect to her own sexuality and not only think, oh, what's happening to his body is, gross or disgusting. Gross and disgusting, as maybe the reason why children think that way is because they're not familiar with it. They don't live in that adult sexual reality. That's not their language. That's not the way that they think or they feel or they speak. And as adults, we need to learn. As teenagers, we need to be educated, and as adults, we need to learn about the correlation between the way our bodies were created and how we bring our bodies together with ourselves to a sexual relationship. I'll share something about myself. When I was younger, people used to always call me the ivory girl. That was the term. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm happy with that. I'm not sure I like that definition. And then when they find out that I'm a sex therapist, they're like in shock. Wait a second, you were like this Yaldat Tova Yerushalayim, and now you're a sex therapist. How does that jive? And the way it jives is because it's natural. It's natural to be able to discuss sexuality and to discuss our bodies as sexual adults in a sort of like an evolutionary or developmental fashion. The way that we view sexuality as a child is not the way that we view sexuality as a teenager, an adult, and then through the decades. It's a different experience, and that's okay. And we want to encourage that. In this case, I would be concerned about her visceral reaction. And I would think about, you know, what sort of led to that? How did, you know, you were saying, I think Lizzie, you were saying, you know, how did she see her parents' relationship? And Dr. Ribner said, you know, how did her father sing Eshet Chayil to her mother? I would also want to ask her how her father reacted to her as she developed. That's not an easy thing for fathers, you know, or for mothers to see their babies growing into adults, and what kind of messages she got as she was growing up.
A lot of fathers are afraid to hug their daughters who are going through puberty. And I think it's very important for everybody out there to realize that it is so important. There are studies that say that girls who have been in the arms of their father, a safe place, can move into the arms of their husband. But if they felt their father retreating from them because their body was turning into a woman, then they don't like their body. They feel bad about it. They feel rejected. And it's just very important for fathers to keep hugging their girls so that they can like themselves, feel comfortable in their own body and feel comfortable with a safe man. It's obviously a father and a husband are not the same thing, but the idea is that touch didn't stop because of a reason, and it continued. And it should always continue.
I think one of the underlying messages here that we're all trying to emphasize is the critical importance of parents talking to their children about human sexuality. I mean, the fact that we have sort of relegated that responsibility to a relatively new function in the Jewish community called chassan teachers or kala teachers. When I got married, there was no such thing, and that wasn't so long ago. I think that because of that, it's even more of a sort of an exemption for parents to say, okay, I'm not going to talk to my children about this. I don't know what the consequences may be, and maybe they'll talk to their friends. And certainly it's not going to encourage children to have any kind of sexual experience beyond the values of their family. And the more we can do, I think, to encourage parents to speak to their children, as Lizzie points out, age appropriate. And if you need some guidance about how to do that, the guidance is certainly available. But that message, which is so fraught with values, we put in the hands of people that we don't know, in the hands of strangers, and we do that several months before a wedding, and we assume that people are going to have some kind of normative response to their first contact with human sexuality. I think that's just based on moonbeams. We need to be, I think, a lot more aggressive in encouraging any kind of program that we possibly can to enable parents to feel comfortable talking with their children about sexuality.
Yeah.
So important. I just wanted to add on also, just looking at the time too, but just wanted to add on also that I think it's really important that kala teachers do not leave that conversation for the end. It's really important to get the conversation of sexuality right from the beginning, and to put the diagrams and the pictures, whatever is necessary to speak about sexuality out there, because normative, dati leumi, charedi, wherever people are coming from, normative kalot come to their kala teachers with these issues, and they need to be discussed and fleshed out from the beginning, because they might not have gotten that sexual education, and we need to make sure to change, like to work on that, to open them up. So I think that that's also important. With other last minute comments, because I do have.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing, because I want to focus on the audience, tonight's participants, like everyone that's here tonight. You guys are primarily dating seriously or engaged, and you're the ones that are either started to learn with your chatan teachers and kala teachers, or you're looking for someone to teach you. And based on, we can't change what happened in the past, right? You may have had great relationships and discussions with your parents. You may have had great relationships and discussions with your parents, just not on the topics of sexuality, because that's a tough one. And so when you're looking to learn with someone before you get married, really look into who you're learning with. Talk to some other people who have learned with them, and be an advocate for yourselves. The fact that you're on this webinar, that's fantastic. And this is going to be recorded, and you can recommend that your friends listen to it too. You can go back and listen to it again, because you also want to take the responsibility as adults now to ask some questions and to open up conversations and to say, wait, you know what, I learned about this and this. Can you please, help me explore that further, or teach me a little bit more about this, or maybe guide me in a direction where I can get that information. So I want to empower you guys also.
And to raise your children differently.
And to raise your children.
There you go.
And I just wanted to say
yeah,
something about college teachers, that all of you that are listening that are engaged, it has to be a good fit. Like, you know, I think go ahead and ask your college teacher if you can meet them first for 15, 20 minutes and see if it's the right person for you, because what might be good for somebody else might not be right for you. And make sure that the college teacher, the Khatan teacher are comfortable talking about anything and everything. Because if they're giving you the message that it's not comfortable, you won't be able to ask what's on your mind. And third thing is, and the last thing is, that we all joke about, we're going to write a book, Crazy Things Our Khatan and Kala Teachers. So if you have crazy things, anybody out there that they've taught you, send it to us on a WhatsApp or something.
That sounds great. Thank you, Lizzie. I just want to, there were a few questions that came in, so I'm going to read one. The first one is directed to Dr. Ribner. In your response to Oran, you spoke about the myth of not being able to stop once you are aroused. Are you saying that the male and female challenge in stopping are the same, or are they different?
They're not dependent on physiology. All right, they're dependent on attitude. They're dependent on the capacity to see yourself as being in control. I mean, society has sort of given men the permission to be less in control than women are. But there's nothing in the buildup, in the hormones, in the muscles, in the blood supply to any aspect of one's sexuality that says that men are more inclined to be this way than women are. It's a societal function. It's a sociological message. And where societies don't have that message, men and women, in fact, do function differently. So yes, I'm saying there are certainly substantial differences between men and women, but not with regard to this.
Okay, thank you. I'm also going to read, I know we're running out of time here, so I'm going to read one more question that came in from our listeners. I'd always expected I would be shomer negia until marriage, but I also assumed I wouldn't still be single in my late 20s. I was in a serious relationship where we decided together that we wouldn't be fully shomer negia and set boundaries we were comfortable with. I felt very comfortable with the decision, but still experience a lot of guilt and find it difficult to accept this changed perception of myself. Can you advise on how to deal with the conflicting emotions? We did say we would talk about guilt and we haven't gotten to it. So who would like to address this one first?
I'm happy to talk about guilt a little bit. I talk about, guilt is a, a superstar in my world here, as professionally and probably personally as well. But I think that that guilt, we need to turn to Brene Brown here, right? Whoever hasn't heard of Brene Brown, go look her up. She speaks about guilt and shame and humiliation and the difference between the three of them. Sometimes guilt comes to sort of like give us a little, flashlight, a little, signal saying, this is something that's not sitting well with you. You need to look at it a little bit more closely, and that's okay. And I would encourage her to look at this a little bit more closely, because as you change in life, like we said before, your decision making is going to be dependent on external factors sometimes. And I know that when we talk about halacha, we say halacha doesn't change. The Jewish laws are the Jewish laws. So how can I all of a sudden sort of be a chameleon here and change? And, those are good questions. Those are very good questions to ask yourself and to contemplate, and to recognize that this is something, the guilt feeling is signaling you to pay attention to this feeling. If it moves into shame, if it moves from I did something that I'm not so comfortable with to I am bad, I did something that is, that is wrong, or that negates my values completely, and I'm a bad person because I did that, that's not so helpful, right? It's not going to help anyone. It's just going to make you feel bad. Guilt comes along with being a Jewish woman. We all know that. There's mother's guilt. There's all the guilt that we have. And, I think that it's something that we need to again, look at from a curious perspective as opposed to a judgmental perspective. You didn't know that you were going to end up in your late 20s and find yourself not married. You expected, when you thought about your life, you're saying maybe you thought you'd be married by now. You wouldn't have to be negotiating these feelings. Give yourself a little grace, give yourself a little space to be able to, to understand yourself. And just because you made a decision to sort of be more flexible with Shmirat Negiah, with a past relationship that was looking very serious, doesn't mean that you can't, go with those values again in the next relationship. That, you're always, the best time to make a change. What do they say? The best time to plant a seed is 70 years ago, and the second best time to plant a seed is today. So plant your seed.
Also, I think it's important sometimes to realize that guilt is the price we're prepared to pay for something that we know we would rather not be doing. As I'll do it, I'll know that I'm going to feel guilty. That means that I still recognize that I probably shouldn't have done it, and I'm prepared to pay that price. As long as I feel guilty, then it's sort of a justification for continuing to do so. I'm not saying that's necessarily the majority of people who have struggled with guilt. And, as Jodi says, one of the things that we share with our fellow religionists of the Catholic faith is that guilt is just part of our experience from the time almost that we were born. A colleague of mine once said we only have to decide where to place it, but it's always there. It is always there. And I think it guides us sometimes. It helps us to realize that maybe we have strayed further from a particular position than we wanted to. But again, I apologize if this may sound somewhat cynical, but it does sometimes also give us a price that we're willing to pay in order to be able to continue to do something that we realize we probably should not be doing.
And I think that I feel there's a lot of parts going on here for this girl. I mean, the guilt is there. That part we've discussed already. But I think she should recognize that there are other parts about her that really she should relish herself about. I mean, she wants to be married. She wants to be in love. She wants to give. She's a normal woman. She has sexual feelings, and that validate those parts that they're there, and that all of them struggle together, and it's really up to her to figure out how. What is to be compassionate to all the parts, but that she has, control over what she would like to do. And I like that, what Jodi said about you can start plant the seeds today, because then guilt doesn't have to be sitting there on your head all the time.
I think I also I like the fact that they're sexually attracted to each other. There's so many people that are struggling with these issues of being sexually attracted to each other, of finding someone that they want to be with. And here she's enjoying, and she's, enjoying being with this guy. So on the one hand, I hear her guilt, and I also think about how it's possible not to take that guilt. Let's say she does marry this guy or gets more serious with this guy. But I do think that we have to hold it a little bit in this place that it's a natural feeling to want to feel sexually attracted with someone and want to be sexual with someone in all those different ways. And I think it's important to be like, you're normal. It's okay.
A question came to me from a teacher who really wanted clarification on the issue of sexual compatibility. She said she's always taught her students that if they have a good relationship and they respect each other and they have attraction and they feel emotionally safe, then they will have sexual compatibility. And somehow it came across to her in the conversation last night that maybe that is not the case.
I would offer a different perspective on this. I think that given the conditions that this teacher is describing in terms of the positive elements of a relationship, if they have feeling desirous of each other, they're both healthy, they have a good sense of emotional intimacy, I think that compatibility is almost inevitably something they can find with each other. It may take a while to search out exactly where that lies in terms of their dynamic. They may need some help in doing it. But if she's talking to 18-year-old high school students, I think the message should be that all things being equal, sexual compatibility is in fact findable.
So there's not that much for me to add, but I will say a few things. I will say that how the couple both think about sex, if they think of it as a good thing, if they're looking forward to it, if they both are on the same page or similar page, that this is something that we want to explore, this is something we want to experiment, this is something we want to enjoy together, then they'll have to figure it out. It might take a long time to exactly get to that place, but as long as they have a good attitude towards it, chances are that they're going to be compatible. Another thing is, one of the things that people argue over is quantity versus quality, how many times they're going to do it versus how good it is when we do it. Some couples want one side of the couple might want more, and the one side of the couple might want less. And is that sexual compatibility? I don't know, but it's sure something that they need to negotiate. And as long as they're negotiating and communicating and talking about their own needs and being giving respect to the other one's needs, then they will be emotionally compatible and hopefully sexually compatible.
I totally agree with you both. I hope I wasn't misunderstood. I would say that sexual compatibility is something that is learned and is a process, and the only time that you're more concerned about it is if there seems to be something very out of the ordinary, some really specific concerns. And in those cases, there can be an issue. But in general, it's a matter of talking things through and a process of being patient and riding the waves.
Just to add in my 2 cents regarding sexual compatibility, I think that the girls that were asking it were, again, 18-year-olds, people of seminary age, and that's a major question that they ask because they are Shermanagia or just not touching a lot before they're getting married, and they really, really don't know what's to come and if it's going to work out, and if it's not going to work out, it's something on their minds all the time. So I think we do have to give the positive message that, yes, don't worry, that even if you've been sexually if you've been a Shermanagia, that you still have this ability to work through whatever sexual issues come up. I wouldn't say whatever, most of the sexual issues that will come up. And I think it's really important to give them that positive message. On that note, do we want to leave off on that note? We went through a lot of different things here. I have one more case. Should we do one more case? I have my last case here, and this will end with, is that Ariella is getting married in 2 weeks. She's working on finding all the beauty that will come with a small intimate wedding. Her college classes had to shift to Zoom meetings, which was a bit strange for her, as there are very intimate topics that come up. She is, I just lost that. I can read up here. I just lost where I was. There you go. She's particularly concerned about having negative associations with going to the mikveh, as her first mikveh experience will be under the COVID-19 guidelines. Vulnerability, awkwardness, excitement, and spirituality all get mixed into one very special experience. Now, under the circumstances, she's worried about the safety in going to the mikveh as well. Do you have any ideas on how to make this a unique experience for her? I know this question is kind of taking us a little bit away from the engaged couples, sexuality, kind of thing like that, or the dating couples, but I think that this is a very important question that is coming up right now for people who are, engaged and looking towards going to the mikveh, all of these feelings that are coming up right now during COVID.
Yeah, I think that I'll get started on this one. I'll try to be quick and concise. This is something that's definitely coming up for a lot of kalot, and we don't want this to get lost in the shuffle. We want, especially we're coming here from the Eden Center, which, talks a lot about mikvah and being able to have a positive mikvah experience and view it as something that's associated with health and wellness. And going to the mikvah for the first time around this pandemic, COVID-19, Corona, whatever we want to call it, is definitely adding another layer to the experience. And we're concerned about, about transmission. And it's an opportunity, first of all, to educate yourself about the mikvah and the process of going to the mikvah on a way that maybe you wouldn't have that opportunity in a different circumstance, right? You're going to be focusing on, taking the time and being, intentional about your experience. You're going to learn how to ask the questions and to look into the safety and how your mikvah that you're planning to go to is adhering to the guidelines. You're going to be proactive and you're going to become more comfortable asking questions about mikvah than maybe you would have been in another situation. Now, I totally get it. We've been getting phone calls, nonstop by women that have been going to the mikvah for years and years about their concerns. So yeah, I get it that you're concerned. And I would encourage you to reach out to the mikveh attendants, the balaniyot in your mikveh. Maybe speak to your mom or to your kala teacher. Maybe you want to request that your kala teacher can be your balanit, you know, or your mom, if you're comfortable with that, can be your balanit, or someone that you're familiar with, so that you can feel that you already feel a sense of security and safety in, you know, with them, and they can sort of bring you through this mikveh experience in the most positive way possible.
Okay.
It's a COVID, which will be like piece of cake.
I also just wanted to add on to this that I think that the mikveh is what we make of it. And this is a very good example. There's a lot of different factors that always comes into a mikveh experience, whether it be the, you know, what's going on in her life, or, you know, who knows what's going on. And therefore, I think it's really important as like our first step to be like, okay, this is yours. Make it into the experience that you want it to be. So for example, she could focus on the preparations at home and make that more calming, and make the focus, you know, not at the mikveh itself, but in that space. In addition, I would also tell her to, you know, the mikveh itself, the waters are super safe. COVID is not transferred there, and therefore take the time to be in the water. Make that your spiritual moment. Take the time to think while you're there. Just because of the late hour, I just wanted to end with that thought. I also,
That's such an important thing to say.
oh, Lizzie, go ahead.
A little tiny thing. I think it's very helpful if girls go to see the mikveh before they have to go to the mikveh. If somebody could take them just to see it, I think that would calm them down, because just not knowing where you're going, and if the balanit is going to keep all the guidelines, and it is such a pressure. But taking a trip with somebody for 15 minutes to see what it looks like and to see if they're keeping the guidelines before she has to go might help her when she has to go.
Amazing. Thank you, Lizzie. In fact, I wanted to thank all of our speakers for their time, to thank Dr. Ribner, Jodi Wachspress, and Lizzie Rubin. We've heard a lot of experiences, a lot of ideas and suggestions, which we hope will be helpful. We want to remind everyone that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution, and those individuals or couples are not alone and are encouraged to seek assistance from professionals when the situations warrant, regardless. One more time, you are not alone. We have all had our challenges and have come out stronger because of them. We wish everyone continued health and look forward to seeing you in the next session. I just want to post up also, if anyone would like to see any of the therapists that were mentioned, that were here speaking to us on this webinar, their email addresses are over here along with their phone numbers. They'd be happy to speak with you. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all the panelists, for this amazing evening.